if I feel like it? What if I don't feel like it?
Part 2. Having been socially put on equal footing with the superiors, the inferiors still feel wronged because the real issue is innate, unchangeable human nature. They then feel that the inferior were at the bottom too long, and now just needed a boost, and then they'd be equal to the superiors. Give the Negro a leg up. He's been oppressed for so long, he needs a little starting boost. But that failed at the same. So now they are finally, slowly realizing that the issue is with human nature, though they can't really fathom it to its full extent. Thinking of it mostly in terms of abstract thinking and materialism, what do you think is there left to do to realize equality if the inferiors can't climb up to the level of the superiors? The opposite? To bring down the superiors to the level of the inferiors? Exactly. And so then they try to shame the superiors and blame them for all ills of the world, but this will have about as much success as their previous approach, because innate nature remains the same. They will inevitably come to the only logical conclusion. The only way to realize the myth of equality is if there are no superiors. This was already manifested once before in history, when some claim that nobody will be poor if nobody is rich. So what you've told me so far, then, is that fascism seeks to know and uphold the truth, regardless of what it is, while the rest, who are only minding their own interests, reject anything that doesn't satisfy their desires. Indeed, you can look around at all the truth preachers in the world. I guarantee you that they all fall to the second category and only fascism stands alone, and that's how you know it upholds the truth. Well, this is all certainly different from what I've ever heard of fascism or even seen of it on the news. There are those who misrepresent fascism, and they too fall to that second category. This is precisely why it is so hard for us. Even a small deviation from the truth already puts you on the side of lies and falsehoods. However, it should come as no surprise that superiors seem to be naturally inclined to support fascism, seeing as how if you are already born with things as they are supposed to be, you find it easier to come into the fold completely. But modern education and socialization of children muddle everything. This is why our opponents' claim that fascism is just looking out for the interests of the superiors falls flat. If it is in your nature to be superior, then you are supposed to be superior. Thus, it lacks the aspect of having an interest. Yet, as I just mentioned, due to modern socialization, a lot of fascists make a point of how they defend the interests of their race. But this is only so because they have no other way of expressing what is a much deeper instinct. Because of how socialism today teaches everyone the equality myth? Yes. It is truly like the world is in a deep dream, or illusion. Even if you realize something is wrong, there are still subtle strings attached to you which are that much harder to shake off. One other reason why you hear wrong things of fascism is that our opponents can only think in terms of interests, abstract concepts, and materialism. Their limited vision cannot grasp the full, broader scope of fascism, and so they try to explain what fascism is by their means. As a result, you get a disfigured representation. Yet another irony arises. Can you guess what it may be this time? Well, based on what you said, is it that they have created a different kind of fascism? Absolutely right. They themselves conjured up an image of fascism that was picked up by the ignorant as their mantle, and thus in turn feed their misrepresented image of fascism, which is only fascism in name, and some rudimentary aspects, missing its core that I've laid out before you in our discussion. Finally, something that somewhat clarified the situation, even if not completely, and the notion of people essentially fighting something out of their own creation without realizing it, while remaining completely ignorant of what it was they intended to combat in the first place, was almost as if from some myth or dramatic theater. This helped me finally, somewhat, reconcile my conflicted feelings about this man, as I now knew that trying to apply to him the image I was so familiar with was futile and simply wrong. Suddenly a thought occurred to me. So, essentially, this other fascism, the one your opponents made up, if they all judge you or try to measure you from their own position of falsehood, does that mean they all create different images of fascism, making fascism rather just something that they imagine opposes their views? He slightly raised his eyebrows and gave me the first broad smile I had seen since he first approached me on this day. Yes, that is a keen observation you made. The definition of fascism, thus, also depends on whom you ask, and they'll describe it to you in terms of what they are afraid it'll do to interfere with their petty interests. You'll hear all about how fascism is corporatist, capitalist, totalitarian, and etc., but they will never be able to explain to you what is the real core of our views, upholding truth. Everyone is taught to view fascism as something political and thus subject to such categorization, but in reality we hate politics. We just lead a struggle to make truth manifest in human life. Thus this struggle inevitably touches all areas of human life, and obviously the primary system of influencing that is politics. But you still believe in some sort of racial structure, social structure, and some kind of political system, right? Good question. I'll need to reiterate, though, some key points we have already established, namely that truth affects everything in life, so much so that you can say that life is truth, because nature is truth, and so on. Thus, it also includes human nature, where, as I pointed out, there must exist inequality, with superiors and inferiors. So there must be someone at the very top, a leader, but not because it is a politically pragmatic move, or an economically and socially pragmatic move. There must be a leader because it can't be otherwise, if your pursuit is establishing truth in human life. So you're saying that your system is in no way political, as it's not based in abstract musings of how things should be for certain people. Exactly. We are defending something that is born in truth, but has over time corrupted due to the rise of inferiority and interests. This was well known by ancient Greeks, who explained this corruption in the anacyclosis, where the noble monarch, who degenerates into a tyrant, is replaced with a noble aristocracy, which in turn denigrates into an oligarchy, only to be replaced by a democracy that denigrates into ochlocracy, the rule of the mob. At that point, the noble monarch must again rise, leading everyone back to the ordained order of things. It is simply truth that there must be a leader, as opposed to the opinion that there must be a democracy. Democracy is in hell. Heaven is a Sardom, as a man had once said. So is totalitarianism something that is truly your goal? Do you view it as a noble system or as a degenerated version of something else? This question has an answer that I'm sure you'll respect now. Fascism is not totalitarian, but it can be. Not because that is its nature, but because totalitarianism can be used as a tool. Fascism can also be, in this same sense, anarchistic, because it can likewise use anarchy as a tool. Trying to classify fascism as totalitarian is, once again, abstract classification. The system that fascism offers society is no system, which denotes the artificial, fabricated nature of that organization, but rather the organic state, one that is fully compliant to truth and thus is as nature itself, organic, where everything works in harmony. So how does fascism use totalitarianism as a tool? It is used to socialize a new generation of people that would then be able to carry on in the organic society, with no need for a totalitarian structure, until that new generation is ready. It is also used to protect that process from forces, both internal and external, that would stop this new generation from arising. He then gave a short sigh, and with a kind of exasperated smirk shook his head before he continued. When you think about it, all modern states are totalitarian. They do not allow deviation from the myth of equality. They attempt to perpetuate it indefinitely, suppress dissent, and don't allow proponents of dismantling this system to enter even its electoral process, let alone the halls of governance. What is this, if not self-preservation? But what I try to point out for you here is the hypocrisy of it all, the lie that rules over all of us. So you're essentially saying that we've been conditioned by tyrants to think that it is, in fact, fascism that is tyrannical in nature, while keeping us oblivious as to the lie of democracy and making us believe in the equality myth? Indeed, for equality as an ideology demands totality, and as any lie, it requires constant enforcement by totalitarian means. Fascism, on the other hand, can require totality because the truth prevails in all things, but it does not necessarily require totalitarian means. And totalitarianism is never the end goal or even desirable to us. What we want is something organic, something that exists because that is how things must be. It is not an enforced falsehood. In this state, people will be able to discover who it is they truly are, what their innate nature is, and then take their appropriate place in this order. In doing so, having accepted who they are, they can then work on what they were meant to work on, delivering them to real happiness, rather than chasing interests and unrealistic dreams. Then they will act both as individuals and as part of a bigger organism. How's that exactly? As individuals, they will be capable of self-exploration to discover their innate nature, self-determination by accepting their innate nature and striving to reach their ultimate potential, and self-expression by working on what they love and what they were meant to be doing. When you do any kind of job because that is what you enjoy doing, you turn that job into art, as parts of an organism where everything is doing what it is meant to do in its proper place. They create a state of harmony that needs no artificial enforcement. So if everyone follows their innate truth, they follow a greater truth, which will manifest as the organic state. Exactly so, for if you accept truth, then what is there to enforce? Truth is organic, everything in its place and working. That's how nature is, and that's how human life can be manifested in social form. The human organism works in the same fashion. The liver doesn't aspire to be the heart or the brain. It just is, fulfilling the function it was meant to fulfill. Yet we both know that the body needs it all the same, making it a part of something greater. This is, by the way, what we call destiny. To us, destiny is one's potential. The caterpillar's destiny is to become a butterfly, though not every caterpillar does, obviously. But that is its potential, and the same is true for people. The caterpillar analogy he gave made this interpretation of destiny quite clear, and the whole notion of organic society was slowly becoming more and more appealing. I still held my reservations as there were still issues unanswered, though I was all but certain he'd have no trouble explaining them. I had thought several times in the conversation if maybe I'm falling for propaganda and being pulled into something sinister. But curiosity always won out, and no matter what, I couldn't come up with a real argument against his reasoning. Whether it was because I had simply never encountered such reasoning before, or because I wasn't smart enough, I don't know. But I sat in silence and listened to him go on. So you can see that totalitarianism is a good tool, but a temporary tool. Our opponents, on the other hand, are completely reliant on it, even if they can't admit to that fact, since they themselves are slaves to their delusions. Totalitarianism for fascism is a means to an end, because nowadays practically the whole world has been conditioned by the totality of the equality myth. We need an initial system of our own to enforce the truth. It would be our instrument of justice. Okay, okay, so if I get you right, you'd like for people to do what they were meant to do, what's in their nature, so in the end it ends up being some sort of meritocracy, right? In a way, you could say that, yes. Everyone gets the place in the world that belongs to him by virtue of his nature. Since this whole idea of fascists as a genocidal maniacs who want to rule the world is concocted by your enemies, I imagine the other bad things they say about you are false as well. Indeed. So it's not true you're out to get Jews either, right? The stranger seemed surprised at the question for a second, then burst out laughing. Ha ha ha, of course we're out to get Jews. We hate the slimy bastards. He said this as innocently as a child might, which struck me as strange when discussing such a heavy topic. I was mildly offended by his laughter, which I felt in part was directed at me. How can you say something like that? My opinion of you was getting better. What, you're serious? Don't you hate Jews? What do you like about them exactly? I was taken by surprise by him reversing the question back to me and didn't know how to answer. Why would I hate them? I've never even met a Jew, so I don't see why I should be concerned about them. Besides, it's wrong to generalize about people. Just because a person is a Jew doesn't mean they're bad people. I understand. You just don't know anything about them, so you don't see the problem. Okay, let's first address your theory that it's wrong to generalize about people. What do you mean, my theory? It's definitely wrong. What if you misjudge people based on your prejudice? No one deserves to be treated badly because of what others have done. You're right that not all Jews, or all members of any group, will conform to stereotypes 100% of the time, or even most of the time. But imagine you're in the jungle and come across a tiger. Would you be scared? Of course. Most tigers, most of the time, won't attack you, either because they're scared of humans, or because they're not hungry at that time, or for a myriad of other reasons. But isn't it the right reaction to be careful around it? Isn't that the right choice? To protect yourself and others you care about? Yes, of course, that makes sense. But Jews aren't tigers. They won't attack you for no reason, so it's silly to be suspicious and discriminate against them. No, you're wrong. It's perfectly normal and healthy to discriminate. In fact, it's the greatest tool we have to help us survive and prosper. We learn from experience what to expect from people who look a certain way and react accordingly. This allows us to avoid the worst-case scenarios for our lives. Why should you increase the risk factors in your life to spare the feelings of certain groups? Maybe it's fine to discriminate in our people's lives then, but to base government policies on it is totally unjust. You can't make me swallow that pill. The basic fact of life is this. Whenever two groups exist within the same territory, they will always end up fighting to get the resources and political power. This is nature. If you want to avoid conflict, then the only solution is to make sure every group has its own territory. So in a way, you're right that it's wrong to have one government discriminating against a foreign group in its midst. The correct solution is to eject them instead. But Jews aren't even that different from us. We've been coexisting for so long. Why would they cause problems? I can't even tell a Jew apart from our people, so you're making a mountain out of a molehill. That's where you're wrong. Jews are the most different group from our people there is on this planet. They are creatures that fester and willfully, knowingly indulge in falsehoods. While we strive for truth, they are truth's sworn enemy. This seems far-fetched. Remember the point we discussed earlier, how humans can have different natures? Yes, but it's obvious that this applies to individuals, not groups. I mean, there are tall Jews, short Jews, smart Jews, and stupid Jews, right? So we can't put them all in the same basket. I'm sure there's plenty of scumbags among them, but what you're saying just doesn't seem believable at all. Let me ask you this. Do you think some groups tend to excel at certain things or to have different traits as a group? I don't know. How about the Olympics then? What type of people tend to win foot races? Blacks seem to win almost all racing events. What kind of people tend to win weightlifting events? It seems it's almost always whites or Asians. And swimming? Never seen a black win or do well at water sports. The jumping events? I see where you're going with this, but this is only athletics. Those things are secondary. No, you're wrong. If you search your memory honestly, you'll see that in every domain, some types excel more often than others, whether it's school, chess, ping pong, artistic merit, you name it. I became conflicted. On one hand, I hated the point he was making, and I was certain he was wrong. But as my mind raced to find counterexamples, all I could come up with were more confirmations, almost as if my mind had already done the job of putting people in categories along the lines that he was suggesting. Look, it's one thing to say that groups are better at something or another, but it's another thing to accuse them of being evil liars. What's the difference? Why do you draw that line? We can all choose to do good or evil. No one is forcing anyone to commit theft or rape kids. No group has a monopoly on being a scumbag. There's plenty of terrible criminals among our people as well. How we act is a reflection of our nature, good and evil, as you call them. Our judgments you make according to your nature and your interests. But some people, as a part of their very being, have different tendencies and interests. They will have a tendency to act in a way you would consider criminal, and some groups are more likely than others to have many of these individuals. I still can't cross that bridge. This all seems abstract to you because you know nothing of Jews, but I'm sure you have experiences with gypsies. On the other hand, so let's talk about them. I suddenly had a sinking feeling at the mention of gypsies. While I like to think of myself as being free of prejudice, I've had so many bad experiences with gypsies at the capital that I couldn't help feeling hostile towards them. Now whenever I see one, I look around for his friends and keep my left hand on my wallet. I'd rather not think about gypsies. Let's talk about something else. Hit a nerve now, have I? Since everyone can do both good and evil according to you, how about you find me some gypsy families who aren't full of criminals and leeches? Seems like an impossible challenge. Ha ha ha, well you're right of course. Do you still want to argue that no group can exhibit marked tendencies towards what you'd consider evil behavior? It seems like deep down I didn't even believe it myself. I feel embarrassed now. Don't worry about it. Just accept that you don't know much about Jews. Listen, Jews are to deceit what Jews are to deceit what gypsies are to theft. They are falsehood given human form. It is literally the air they breathe. Everything they engage in is perpetually, willfully, and instinctively materialist, abstract, and oriented toward their specific interests. What could make them this way? Repositioning here. What could make them this way? Nothing made them this way, it's just their nature. Their truth, if you will. But this is why they are incompatible with our society. Even more so with the type of organic society we want for the future. Do you think it would be impossible for a Jew to adhere to truth? Are there no Jews that could hear your whole explanation about truth in the organic order and agree with it? If you were to take a Jew and work him in this direction from cradle to the grave, maybe so, and after all, they vary as individuals in the strength of their racial qualities. But policing their proclivities can only go so far, when we talk of going against someone's innate tendencies. That is why one of our strictest policies is to never let Jews in positions of authority over anything, ever. I'm still not convinced. Can't it just be the result of all the persecution they had to deal with over the course of history? Something that happened to them, rather than being their innate nature? They've been run out of virtually every country on this continent and elsewhere. You think everyone else were at fault but the Jews? If your friends warn you not to take some man in for the night, and the man tells you they all treated him badly and ran him out of their homes, are you truly going to think the fault lies with them, or suspect that he did something in each home he was taken into? I suppose I'd trust the judgment of people I know over some stranger whom they all had experiences with. And you'd be right to do that. Nothing made Jews the way they are. There was no event, no catharsis or catalyst that put them on this path as a whole group. It is simply the way they are. But how did we allow them back into our homes again then, if at some point they were run out of their actions? For their actions. One honorable man once said, "A country has the Jews it deserves, just as mosquitoes can thrive and settle only in swamps. Likewise, the former can only thrive in the swamps of our sins." So you're saying that the more we departed from truth, the more we opened the way into our homes for the Jews? They were attracted by the lies and falsehoods that overtook our lives, both because they consciously knew they could exploit it for their benefit, and because their innate nature drew them to what it is only their natural environment. An instinct not unlike that which leads the salmon upstream or the sea turtle back to the place of their birth. But how have we come to this point? For how long now have we been living in a world ruled by lies? Oh, too long. We've lived with lies for centuries now. Centuries? How is that even possible? Do not think that the world we live in today came about overnight. Our fall from truth took us a very long time, with lies slowly chipping away at our understanding of truth, making way for bigger lies that made way for bigger ones still. Think of it as having made a mistake early on in a mathematical equation. The further you continue to solve it, the more the mistake grows and deviates from the correct answer. But it was never by radical revolution that these lies triumphed, but by that same abstract thinking that slowly opened up paths for new lies to take hold. Some, of course, took the form of revolutions, but not without a long existing background that was preparing people to accept such lies, making these revolutions possible in the first place. All civilizations experience a rise and fall, and the fall is most always like slow decay, and we hardly realize it, like a frog in water, not noticing how gradually the water turns to a boil, whereupon the frog dies. His frog example was something I could recall from when I studied biology in school, though one of my coworkers said it's not true for some reason or another. Still, the analogy served to illustrate his point, and I could certainly think of examples in life when people don't notice something is wrong until it's too late. And his mathematical equation was something I could understand all too well, as I was rather proficient with math and algebra and know exactly how easy one seemingly small mistake can create a wildly different outcome. Has a good portion of human history been, then, a growing miscalculation? Some wrong notion, ages ago, becoming the foundation for more incorrect statements that seemingly made sense under that wrong premise? There is, though, another element to how we've come to this decay. We've grown too comfortable with technological advancements. The more we could delegate to machines, the more lazy and complacent we've grown. Each generation grows up with new technology that relieves them of ever having to do certain tasks, and so they grow duller than their predecessors. This comfort likewise leads one to be more tolerant of lies. But surely you don't propose to stop the march of technological process. Of course not, though in certain areas it should be strictly controlled and regulated. We simply have to maintain old ways and old attitudes when faced with new technology. I say, make new technology, but keep old ways. Don't let technology become a crutch. Be capable of relying on yourself should it fail you, and never revere it as though something sacred in and of itself. Any technology is but a tool of our will, and no technology can ever surpass the might of human spirit. During the Great War, certain people thought that war machines were the deciding factor for victory, and while it did give them advantage, their enemy was of great spirit and managed to hold their own and claim victories all the same. Now that you've mentioned war, what of all the adoration that fascism seems to, or has been claimed to have for militarism and war? Those that come before you certainly seem to plot a certain course for war. If you want to know of our attitude to war, then know that we view it as a part of life, and moreover, a great experience for men. We'll pause there. Picking back up. So you do glorify war. But should we not all strive for peace? Why glorify death and destruction? Homes ruined and entire cities razed to the ground. What sort of great experience is that? Those who seek comfort will certainly be averse to war. Those who are selfish can't fathom such selflessness as giving one's life for his comrades in justice. I can hardly think of any wars that were fought for real justice, only for profit, or, like you keep mentioning, their interests. This is true. Most wars have been, for a long time now, used only to further interests. But that is not our war. Thus, in our war for justice and for restoring truth, we will eliminate wars of interest. And what of war being some supposed great experience for men? Let me once again quote one of our own. War is to man what motherhood is to woman. You can't possibly compare the two. But indeed I can. Motherhood is one of the great tests of woman's character. To realize her truth as a woman, likewise, war is one of the great tests of man's character. To realize his truth as a man. War and motherhood help manifest the best qualities of man and woman respectively, while for the inferior of each sex that fail these tests, it serves to show their inferiority. Though, please don't think I say that war and service is for every man. As I said, war is but one of the great tests for men. So you wouldn't force all men to serve in the military? Well, I personally approve of all men getting basic military training, because should war come home, they must know how to defend their home. But being a warrior is a calling, an inner nature that is not the destiny of all men. Anyone can be merely a soldier, by virtue of being recruited and given training. But not anyone can be a warrior, someone whose very nature is disclosed on the battlefield. Warriors are something more noble than merely a soldier who has been recruited, regardless of his character, or has joined the army out of some misguided notions. War is for warriors, not merchants. As one of the great warriors said, heroic values are not those of the merchant, for they value not success but principles. But you too obviously wish to succeed. We want our principles to succeed, to reign supreme, for truth to be restored, not for the sake of personal gain, but because it is right. And how is it that you feel so right? You've explained your views to me with great conviction, and you are very convincing and make appealing arguments, but don't you ever doubt yourself? Never. With all you've learned now, I am sure that you feel I am right too. Doubt creeps in only if you don't know these things, or if you allow falsehoods to cloud your mind. And one cannot win if he doubts himself. One of our champions fought in the Great War, but his country had lost, foremost because there were people back at home, doubting and second-guessing everything, entertaining the notion that their enemy may have a point, and in doing so they betrayed their own soldiers and warriors who fought in the war. He vowed to never let this happen again. History ultimately decided that he was to fall as well, but not out of doubt. Adolf Hitler. I think I knew whom he was referring to, one of the men, if not the man, who was always the face associated with fascism and the horrors that were attributed to it, while being hailed a hero by fascists themselves. You're talking of the man who created fascism? Let me remind you, friend, that fascism was not created because you cannot create truth. It simply is, and thus can have no author, unlike all the man-made ideas that reign today. He was one of the people who provided an invaluable contribution to our understanding of truth and the struggle we face against the world of lies. But you can't call what he had built an organic state, nor can you say the same of these other rulers who followed your views. True, for what they built was not the perfect manifestation of the organic state, but as I've told you, totalitarianism can be a tool for its creation. What those men of the past had built simply never had the chance to grow out of that state, like a caterpillar that never got to become a butterfly. All right. So you are dead set on being right, but don't you believe that in arguing another man's point of view, you might gain a deeper insight into the truth? You're still clinging to the idea of opinions being valid, but arguing a lie only gives opportunity for it to settle doubt in your own mind. All that I've learned from arguing with others is how to argue my points better, and how to deflect lie after lie sent my way. The only point to arguing is to prove that you are right, but never compromise with the other side, because in doing so you compromise your views and let falsehoods settle in. And what of agreeing to disagree, live and let live? Never. To do so is to again compromise your position, as it allows for both arguments to still exist, but a lie cannot exist in the light of truth, so it must be burned. I will only agree to my opponent having an opinion, and thus being wrong. Nothing has ever been achieved by walking away from the conflict, or saying that the opponent may be right. All it does is postpone the inevitable confrontation that grows more and more potentially violent the more it is stayed off. The more the cancer grows in your body, the more radical are the treatments for it. Well, I suppose so. How convincing do you imagine I'd sound if I told people that, well, the other guy over there has an opinion, he might be right too? Ha, I guess that wouldn't be all too convincing at all. It rather makes the other guy seem to be potentially more convincing. Exactly. But what of not arguing people with different opinions at all? Ha, yes, a good deal of my comrades had also thought me a bit mad to argue people who are incredibly unlikely to be swayed by anything, as they are so deeply entrenched in their comforting lies and falsehoods. Some of them have gone as far as to say that I might as well be fighting windmills. We both had to laugh at that one. What an amazing and rather unreal day it's been. The sun was already setting down, and the sky was filled with hues of red, orange, and dark purple. All the errands I wanted to run in the city had been completely forgotten, and now it was almost likely too late to do them anyway. Still, while I understood his views all the better from our conversation, I had come no closer to understanding why he was traveling the world, doing what he did. So why is it that you have traveled such great distances and by such peculiar means? Would you consider him to do ill, who would upset a world which was upside down? I'm not sure what you mean by this. Ha, what I mean is that I'm traveling the lands, causing mischief in the world of lies, and bringing justice wherever I go, throwing my lot in with others who would do the same in their own way. My way is simply that of going wherever my spirit calls me, rather than confining myself to a particular place. My heart calls for travel and adventure. I suppose that is my inner nature. So your only commitment is to the truth and to what you love doing. And in doing what I love, I serve the truth. I believe we have come full circle. The man looked to the setting sky for a few moments in quiet, and I followed suit, reflecting on all that he had told me. My hunch was right. This was truly a once-in-a-lifetime experience, a chance meeting like no other, as I've seemingly gained a whole new perspective of life at large, so very different from everything I've ever known. It was a nice quiet moment we shared. The temperature cooled, and gentle wind blew around us. Finally, the man stood up and stretched his arms and legs. I too got up and stretched a little before I sat on the edge of the well and looked down its dark depth. It's hard to say where my thoughts wandered now, as I looked into the dark. Maybe I was considering how to cope with what I've learned and in this whole experience, knowing that tomorrow I would be back to life as usual. If that were even possible now, as I'm sure I wouldn't be able to help myself but look at everything through this new perspective I've learned. The man put a hand on my shoulder, and I turned my gaze once again to his face. Well, my friend, I'm afraid I must be heading out now. I told you everything that I could with the time we had. You mean there is more still? A whole lot more. But I told you all that you need to know to understand fascism. I told you that which anyone can grasp and thus join in our struggle. There are still deeper roots to our cause, but those are not something that just anyone can understand. But one doesn't need to. What you've learned is enough. I smirked and jokingly asked him, So what? You think I may not be capable of understanding this other, deeper knowledge to fascism? He gave me a heartfelt smile and said, You may very well be capable, but if we were to discuss this now, we'd not leave the sight of this well for days. We both had a laugh, and I walked with him to the highway road. I am likely to have to stir my torero friends from their slumber, as I'll arrive into the city well into the night. You sure you don't need a lift? It's fine, my friend. You've been most pleasant company, and you shared water with me. I won't trouble you for more than that. How long are you planning on staying in the capital? Oh, just a few days. No more than 4. And then? Then? I haven't decided yet. I will let my heart decide, or maybe I'll get another invitation to stay with comrades elsewhere, and make my way to them. Right then. Please know, however, that you were the one whom was pleasant company to me. Today was probably the most noteworthy day of my life, and it is so merely from having met and talked to you. Then I am most pleased that our meeting may have had such a profound effect on you. Hopefully it becomes the seed of something great, and if not, you'll at least always have the story of meeting this peculiar man that called himself a fascist. But here I am on the road again, my feet back to me to march on. I've spent too much time sitting down. Farewell, my friend, and good tidings to you. And to you too, I said as the man had begun to walk off, waving his hand to me as I waved back. I stood for a short moment and looked at his figure, as his figure was growing smaller into the distance, before I walked back to the storage house. It was already so late, and most of my co-workers had already left for their homes. I walked towards my car, as a couple of them had exited the building and on their way to their own cars passed me by, voicing loudly their usual complaints about the boss and how one of them could do the job better, while another felt he was supposed to be something great if only he'd get a break. The very drastic difference between them and the man was all too apparent. He was happy with so little, capable and confident, while they were bitter and loved to complain, but wouldn't do anything to resolve their issues. Their complaining, in and of itself, seemed to be more of a necessity than actually overcoming its source. As I got into the car, I then couldn't help but think that in so many ways I was no different from them, even if I didn't always voice all my complaints and disappointments with my life. I've grown to accept it as a given. I sat in my car, thinking about my own life without starting the engine. It seemed that the more the sun settled and the further away the man was, the more my everyday reality descended once again upon me as the darkness did. It suddenly occurred to me that I didn't even know the man's name. I felt somewhat disappointed at how I didn't have a name to place with the man who had probably been a brighter source of light in my life than the sun itself. I didn't want to dwell on these thoughts, as I could feel myself growing more weary and decided to try and push it all out of my mind and fall back into my normal routine. I started up the car and drove straight to my home, not too far away from the storage house. As I walked away from my car to my house, I stopped for a moment and looked into the direction of the city, once again thinking of the man I met and wondering what he might get into with the toreros. Finally, I made it inside and went straight to bed. The next 3 days I tried to live as usual, but my concern after meeting the man was proven true. I now couldn't help but see everything from his point of view. As I analyzed all I heard and saw through his points, reasoning, arguments, and metaphors, Where I once viewed commercials on television with a blank stare in anticipation of the program to continue, I grew irritated as I couldn't help but think of how these ads appeal to nothing more than our egotism, self-interest, laziness, vanity, and so much more. The news that I used to view as just information about events now seemed to always have some kind of agenda to them that made it all unbearable to watch. I could barely tolerate my more obnoxious coworkers, whose complaints once rolled off me like water off a duck's back, as I'd nod and agree with them. Now I needed to get away from them and their complaining as fast as possible. I couldn't really cope. What was my old life now, if not an illusion that I was awakened from by this chance encounter? But what could I do? Become a fascist myself? The thought still unsettled me, even though I've come to accept most everything we've talked about. These thoughts bothered me constantly, and I couldn't relax for days. On the fourth day since I met the man, I was eating lunch in the break room, when I suddenly caught, from the corner of my eye, the news on the television. I turned around to face it. It was a report of an event that happened just yesterday in the capital. The Toreros had been engaged in some attack on an immigrant group suspected of running a pedophile ring in the city. I watched the footage of masked men beating up foreign-looking people, but it was largely a mess with the police being involved and some passers-by getting caught in the middle. At one point, I saw something that made me jump up and sit closer to the screen, though it all happened so fast that by the time I sat down, it had already cut to other footage. I had to look this up and make sure that I wasn't mistaken. After having asked my coworker if I could use his office computer for what was left of the lunch break, and him agreeing, I got straight to searching. As I was looking for the footage, I stumbled across a wide number of coverages of the event and commentary on it from various people, some claiming that the pedophile ring allegations were unconfirmed, others saying it was an outright lie to justify attacking immigrants, how Toreros were scum and fascist thugs, and so on. Several of them were arrested, and the police were conducting an investigation into the allegations made. Finally, I found the footage and paused it at that moment. It was him, the man I met. The adventurer fascist was in the thick of it. They cut the footage to show him practically fly in from the side of the shot and kick a foreigner square on the chest, sending him tumbling back. I also noted something else. Before he appeared on the screen, the immigrant was raising his leg to kick someone on the ground. It was a woman, a passerby in a white dress that got caught in the middle of it all. Maybe the immigrant thought she was another Torero, or he was too caught up in the fight, but the man appeared just in time to protect her. I found footage made by someone viewing from out their window overlooking the whole mob, and could see that at one point the woman in white was carried out of that mess by a man who set her down and then rushed back into the fight. I was certain this was him again. Leaning back in the chair, I thought about this until my coworker walked in and told me the break was over and I needed to get out of his office and back to my own tasks. I walked back into the storage hangar and resumed my work, though my actions were mostly automated as I was thinking again of the man, the fight, the alleged pedophile ring. The allegations of such a group had existed for a while now, months, if not longer. I even remember that when I would hear about it, I'd voice how horrible this was if true, and then immediately forget about it as my everyday concerns would take over. I seemed to be morally outraged at the time, but now I couldn't think of it as anything more than complacency. That was not outrage. I had forgotten about this news piece until today, and what I felt now was real outrage. Outrage that grew out of what the man would call a desire for justice. Then I stopped with a heavy crate in my hands and just stood there, looking into space, not really seeing anything in front of me. I felt my heart race and again thought back to the man and what he told me. I will let my heart decide. I dropped the crate and proceeded to walk out of the building. Nobody had really paid attention to me at that moment, so I was left unobstructed. I should have walked to the boss, if he was even in his office, and told him that I quit, but it seemed rather a meager and pointless thing to do. I drove straight home and began to pack an old backpack that I had, by no means suited for traveling, but it was all I had. I packed it only with some extra clothes and essentials, as well as all the money I had in the world, which wasn't all that much. I left my home and drove into the city. Before leaving, I looked up some information on the Toreros and found out that they own a bar in the capital. This was my destination. Having parked outside the bar, I left the backpack in the car and got out. As I walked towards the door, doubt crept in, and I started second-guessing what I was doing. I all but stopped right at the entrance to the bar when again I thought back to the man. There are no doubts if truth is on your side. Know yourself and follow your heart. How was I to know what kind of man I am if I did not face my fears? I breathed out, breathed in, and walked in. The bartender was, of course, a Torero member. He didn't really trust me as I told him that I want to find the man whose name I didn't know, and more Toreros came up behind me listening to the conversation. So I told the bartender of my chance encounter with the man, and one of the Toreros piped up behind me. "Oh yeah, he spoke of you. I was scared being surrounded by the wolves in their own den." But once that verified my story, they all seemed to relax and sat at the bar with me as I told them of my meeting and everything the man told me, and what an effect it had on me. They shared with me some stories of his time with them in return, which wasn't just the event from yesterday. He helped them in a charity event where they gave away free food to homeless and out-of-work natives of our land, how they played some sports, shared dinner, and how he even spent time babysitting the children of one of the men at the bar while he was out. I could very well recognize in their stories the man I had met, as they too talked of him in warm, respectful, and comradely tones. I told them again how I wanted to see him, to which they replied that he had in fact left the city early this morning. To my luck, however, they did know which road he took and where he was heading. He was invited by another fascist group to their native island, north of the continent, and the man was going to travel across our country, and then through another one, before he'd get a boat to take him to the island itself. If I were to leave right now, I could possibly catch up to him. They too did not know his true name, but only the name by which he preferred people refer to him, Don. When I drove to the outskirts of the city on the road that the toreros told me he had taken, I got out of my car for the last time and grabbed my backpack. From here on in, I was going to proceed on foot and catch up to him, and then we'll finally be able to exchange our names, and I would join him in his adventures as he tells me what else there is to know. Later that same day, he smiled brightly at me as he said, Well, it's nice to finally have a name to go with your face, Sancho. Iha alala." And that concludes a Squire's trial.